Welcome to Crime Secrets, the channel where real investigations and shocking true crime stories are brought to life.
Court documents say convicted killer Kenneth Smith remained strapped to a gurney for hours.
Attorneys say that he was repeatedly jabbed with needles in his arms and hands.
On May 3, 1946, convict Willie Francis felt more than 2,000 volts of electricity tear through his body as he sat strapped to the electric chair. Witnesses believed they had just watched a man lose his life, yet he somehow remained alive, shaking and gasping in a moment that stunned an entire nation. This unbelievable survival sparked a wave of fear, legal battles, and moral debates that still echo through history. Today we look at 10 shocking cases of individuals who survived their own executions, and the haunting twists that followed. And we begin with one of the most disturbing modern examples, the case of Kenneth Smith. On November 17, 2022, American convict Kenneth Smith was taken into the death chamber for what was supposed to be his final moment. But what happened inside that room would become one of the most unsettling failures in execution history. Smith's execution was ordered to pause by one of the highest courts in the country. Yet the process began anyway, creating a chilling controversy that raised serious questions about the system itself. Smith's story goes back to the 1980s. He was hired by preacher Charles Sennett Sr. to end the life of his wife, Elizabeth Sennett. The preacher was drowning in debt and believed that collecting her life insurance would solve his problems. He paid Smith and another man, John Forrest Parker, $1,000 each for the crime, a decision that shattered multiple lives forever. But things didn't unfold the way the conspirators imagined. Investigators quickly connected the pieces, and Smith was arrested and later sentenced to death. For 33 long years, he waited on death row until the state finally scheduled his execution. Yet when the moment arrived, the medical team could not find a vein to begin the lethal injection. They pierced his arms again and again while he begged them to stop, trapped in a scene that felt more like a nightmare than a controlled procedure, Smith later revealed, when no workable veins could be found. They attempted a central line in the subclavian artery, leaving him in severe pain and shock. After nearly 4 hours of failed attempts, officials returned him to his cell and finally obeyed the court order to halt the execution. But the ordeal was only the beginning. In August 2023, the state of Alabama approved a new method for ending his life, nitrogen hypoxia, marking the beginning of an even darker chapter in his story. Now, this new method of execution had never been used before, and officials believed that Kenneth Smith had avoided death so many times that nitrogen hypoxia was the only remaining option. All he needed to do was inhale the gas. And the state believed the journey toward the afterlife would begin almost instantly. But the question lingered. Could he possibly survive again? This time the chances looked impossibly slim. Number 9 brings us to another extraordinary case, Raml Broom. On September 15, 2009, Broom, convicted of killing a young girl in Ohio, was scheduled to face lethal injection. But what unfolded inside that chamber would become one of the most controversial failed executions in United States history. The team responsible for carrying out the procedure encountered one obstacle after another, turning what should have been a routine process into a shocking ordeal. Born June 4, 1956 in Muskegon, Michigan, Broom moved with his mother to Ohio at the age of 5. As he grew older, his life spiraled into a series of crimes that placed him on a destructive path. His earliest known offenses began in 1974, involving car robberies on highways, and later escalated into violent acts against women. But the crime that sealed his fate was the tragic abduction and murder of Trina Middleton, a young girl walking home from a football game with friends in East Cleveland, Ohio. Investigators eventually connected Broom to the crime through DNA evidence, and he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. But when the day came, things took an astonishing turn. For 2 long hours, the execution team attempted to insert an IV line, piercing his skin repeatedly while he winced and cried out in agony. The medical staff tried again and again, only to fail each time, transforming the chamber into a scene of physical and emotional chaos. The pain was so extreme that the state government stepped in, halting the execution and postponing it for 1 week. But that 1-week delay grew into years as Broom's lawyers launched multiple appeals, arguing that attempting a second execution would be unconstitutional. During this time, Broom even wrote a book about his harrowing experience, giving the world an inside view of the failed procedure that left him physically injured and psychologically shaken. After surviving the 2009 attempt, he was eventually rescheduled for March 16, 2022, but fate intervened again. On December 20, 2020, before the new date arrived, Broom passed away from COVID-19 complications while still on death row. Even though he never escaped his sentence entirely, he undeniably survived an execution and lived far longer than the state had planned. Number 8 brings us to William Duell, a case that shows exactly why hanging was once abandoned as a reliable method of execution. In 1740, Duell, a teenager at the time, was found guilty of being an accessory to an assault act in England. But what happened after his hanging shocked an entire country? William Duell was hanged at Tyburn alongside 4 other condemned prisoners, and witnesses believed his fate was sealed as his body dangled for nearly 20 minutes. After being declared dead, his body was cut down and transported to an anatomy theater, where physicians prepared to begin dissection, a common practice in that era for those sentenced to execution. But then something astonishing happened. As Duell's clothing was removed and his body was placed on the dissection board, one of the attendants noticed a faint, slow movement in his chest. His breathing, at first barely noticeable, became stronger and faster, shocking everyone in the room as he began to cling back to life. Within only a few hours, Duell was able to sit upright and speak, leaving the medical staff in complete disbelief. Unfortunately for Duell, the attendants immediately reported this unexpected recovery to the authorities, and he was taken straight back to prison that same night. Later examinations revealed that the intense pressure of the noose had caused delirium, leaving Duell unable to remember the execution at all. By the next day, he had fully regained his health, sparking widespread curiosity and sympathy. The public quickly learned what had happened, and they were thrilled by the idea of this young man surviving an execution that should have ended his life. Because of his mental state and the remarkable recovery, Duell received a pardon and had his sentence changed to penal transportation, meaning he was exiled to North America. He eventually settled in Boston, where he lived out his remaining years until his reported death around 1805, a man who literally returned from the brink. Number 7 brings us to John Lee, one of the most mysterious and talked about failed executions in British history. On February 23, 1885, officials attempted to execute Lee by hanging not once, not twice, but 3 times, and each attempt failed in ways that baffled everyone involved. John Lee, born August 15, 1864, worked as a servant in England. At age 21, he was accused of ending the life of his employer, Emma Keyes, inside her home. The evidence against him was thin, mainly that he was the only male present in the house, combined with a criminal past and a few cuts on his arm. Lee insisted he was innocent, yet he was sentenced to death. But when execution day arrived, something extraordinary occurred. Lee was placed on the trapdoor, the noose fixed around his neck, the hood lowered, and when the executioner pulled the lever, nothing happened. The trap refused to open. The executioner tried again and again, and still the door remained firmly in place, turning the scene into a stunning embarrassment for everyone present. Officials paused the execution and tested the mechanism repeatedly. Each test succeeded perfectly until Lee stepped back into position, and once again the trapdoor refused to drop. Throughout the entire ordeal, Lee stayed unnervingly calm, stating that his faith would protect him from harm. After this baffling series of failures, a judge commuted his sentence to life imprisonment. Over the years, new information suggested Lee may not have been the only male in the house that night, strengthening his claims of innocence. In time, he was released in 1907, but what happened afterward remains a lingering mystery. Some reports claim he died in a workhouse during the Second World War, while others insist he traveled to the United States, became a public lecturer, and lived until 2009, a claim still debated today. Regardless of which version of his later life is true, John Lee will forever be remembered as the man they could not hang. His story has echoed through history as one of the most baffling execution failures ever recorded, setting the stage for another extraordinary case, Anne Green. Number 6 takes us back to December 14, 1650. Anne Green, an English domestic servant, was sentenced to death by hanging for the crime of feticide, a serious charge in a period when medical understanding was limited and the justice system was strikingly harsh. Her story has fascinated historians for centuries because of how unlikely her survival truly was. Born in 1628, Anne worked as a maid in the household of Sir Thomas Reed, a justice of the peace in Oxfordshire. During her time there, she became pregnant by Sir Thomas's grandson, Geoffrey Reed. After 17 weeks, she experienced a miscarriage. In deep fear of judgment and punishment, she attempted to hide the remains, but when they were discovered, suspicion immediately fell on her. With little medical knowledge and strong social bias, she was accused of intentionally ending the pregnancy and quickly sentenced to hang. But Anne's real story, the story that made her name echo through time, began only after the execution itself. She was hanged at Oxford Castle for nearly 30 minutes, long enough for the crowd to believe her life had ended. Her body was then removed, placed in a coffin, and sent to the physicians at the University of Oxford for dissection, a common practice for those executed during that era. Yet Anne was not gone. She had survived for an entire day with no food, no water, and almost no air inside that coffin. When a physician prepared to open her chest, he noticed something extraordinary, a faint pulse. Imagine the shock as Anne's fingers twitched and her chest began to move, revealing signs of life in a woman everyone thought had already passed. A group of physicians worked on her for hours, using heated plasters, stimulants, and gentle massage, until Anne finally opened her eyes and spoke. Her survival was seen as so miraculous that no one dared challenge her right to live. 3 days later, Sir Thomas Reed, the only man who could have objected to her pardon, passed away, leaving no barrier to her freedom. Although a few townsmen shouted that she should be executed again, no official authority supported the idea, and Anne was allowed to walk out as a free woman. Many believed divine intervention had saved her, especially because she insisted she had done nothing intentionally harmful. Anne went on to marry, have children, and live peacefully until her death in 1659, a remarkable ending for a woman who returned from the edge in a way almost no one could explain. Number 5 brings us to one of the most chilling survival stories in American history, Willie Francis. While some people have survived failed lethal injections, almost no one has survived an electric chair. Yet in 1946, Willie Francis did exactly that, in a moment that shook the entire country. 2 years earlier, a pharmacist in St. Martinville, Louisiana, named Andrew Thomas, had been killed. Rumors soon circulated in the community about possible mistreatment and personal conflicts involving Thomas, which fueled all kinds of theories about who might have been responsible. The case remained unsolved for months until August 1945, when 16-year-old Willie Francis was detained as a suspect. Authorities claimed Francis possessed Thomas's wallet, although no physical evidence proving this was ever submitted in court. Even more troubling, the firearm used in the killing was eventually linked not to Francis, but to a gun belonging to a local deputy sheriff, raising serious questions about the direction of the investigation. So how did Francis become the focus? The only real pieces of evidence were 2 written confessions, which he later insisted were forced out of him. During the trial, his court-appointed attorneys mounted almost no defense. They made no objections, called no witnesses, and took no steps to challenge the accusations against him. Within only 2 days, and judged solely by 12 white jurors, Francis was found guilty and sentenced to die, despite his young age at the time. Then came May 3, 1946, the day of his execution. Francis was strapped into the electric chair, and electricity surged through his body, yet he lived. His survival became one of the most shocking execution failures in modern American history. Apparently, investigators later discovered that the portable electric chair had been set up incorrectly by an intoxicated prison guard, a shocking detail that explained how Willie Francis survived the first attempt. This revelation immediately raised questions about the entire process. Many wondered how such a catastrophic mistake could have happened in a moment meant to be carried out with precision and care. Soon after, attorney Bertrand DeBlanc took up Willie's case. He believed something deeper was wrong, and he fought fiercely to persuade the Supreme Court to overturn the sentence. DeBlanc presented new facts suggesting Francis had been wrongfully targeted, including one disturbing detail. The bullets removed from Andrew Thomas's body had mysteriously disappeared just days before trial. Evidence vanishing like that was a massive red flag, and it pointed strongly toward the possibility that Willie had been framed. But despite all arguments, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected the appeal. And so, on May 9, 1947, Willie Francis was once again placed in the electric chair, this time under far stricter conditions. Before his execution, he delivered a haunting final message to a reporter. I'm gone. Nah, meet the Lord with my Sunday pants and Sunday heart. Moments later, he passed away. Even today, it remains astonishing to imagine thousands of volts surging through his body the first time, and him walking away alive. Number 4 takes us back to Alabama, a state now known for multiple failed lethal injections. And in the case of Alan Eugene Miller, the attempt went so wrong that it nearly ended his life through repeated puncture wounds rather than the lethal drugs themselves. September 22, 2022, was the day scheduled for Miller's execution. He had been convicted of ending the lives of 3 co-workers, Lee Holbrooks, Chris Scott Yancey, and Terry Jarvis, during a delusional episode in 1999. But when execution day arrived, the team faced immediate trouble. They could not locate a suitable foreline, and their attempts soon escalated into an hour and a half of painful needle insertions into Miller's arms, hands, and even his feet. The repeated attempts left him shaking, bleeding, and fully conscious as each painful puncture landed. It was a disturbing scene unlike anything most people expect from a regulated medical procedure. Eventually, after nearly 2 hours of struggling, the execution team strapped Miller's chest, tilted the gurney upright, and then left the chamber altogether, leaving him bleeding and alone, believing he might die in that position. Yet after about 30 unbearable minutes, officials reversed course, lowered him from the gurney, stitched his wounds, and returned him to his cell. Alan Eugene Miller had survived the execution attempt in one of the most chaotic failures the state had ever recorded. What happens next for Miller? His legal team is now fighting to change the method of execution entirely. Alabama has already had multiple errors in recent years, and Miller's case became the 3rd time in 4 years that an injection attempt was botched. His attorneys argue he cannot be subjected again to the same trauma, especially since the previous attempt left him in severe physical and emotional distress. Today, Miller remains one of the very few people on death row who survived an actual execution attempt and continues to live. Number 3 brings us to a man whose story is almost unbelievable, John Smith. If there were ever a record for the most execution attempts survived by a single individual, he would hold it without question. Born in 1661, Smith lived a life on the edge. He served in the Navy as a merchant sailor before drifting into theft and burglary in London. His criminal choices eventually caught up to him, but not even the gallows could keep him down the way authorities expected. After serving as a sailor and later as a soldier, John Smith's life took a sharp turn. During his time in the military, he mingled with the wrong people, forming connections that dragged him deeper into criminal activity. By December 5, 1705, he stood before a court, found guilty on 2 indictments, and sentenced to death. At first, Smith appeared strangely calm, almost indifferent, but that confidence faded the moment the preparations for hanging began. As the execution started, Smith's family erupted into frantic panic, trying desperately to lessen his suffering as he struggled on the rope. But after hanging for nearly 15 long minutes, far longer than most men endured, Smith was somehow still breathing. Witnesses were stunned as officials cut him down and carried him into a nearby house, where he slowly recovered from what should have been a fatal ordeal. On February 20, 1706, the authorities granted Smith a full pardon due to the traumatic nature of his failed execution, a decision that marked one of the most unusual moments in British legal history. But instead of embracing a new start, Smith slipped right back into the world of housebreaking. His renewed crimes landed him in custody once again. Yet due to complicated legal issues and the fact that he had just survived an execution, he was released without further punishment. Remarkably, his luck didn't stop there. Smith was arrested a 3rd time for housebreaking, clearly showing that he had learned nothing from his second chance. Officials believed it was time for justice to finally catch up with him, but the day before his trial, the prosecutor suddenly died, and Smith was once again a free man. Such extraordinary misfortune for the courts and extraordinary good fortune for Smith left people convinced he must be one of the luckiest men alive. But even luck has limits. On May 17, 1727, the now 66-year-old Smith was caught stealing a padlock with an accomplice. His partner managed to flee, but Smith was captured and accused of attempting to break into a warehouse, a very serious offense. This became his 3rd conviction, and the court decided he would not escape justice this time. Smith begged for a physical punishment instead, hoping to avoid exile, but the Lord Mayor denied his request. He was sentenced to penal transportation to Virginia, forced to leave his entire family behind. What happened to him after that remains a mystery, but one can only hope his unusual streak of luck stayed with him. Number 2 takes us to an astonishing case involving Joseph Samuel, an event so bizarre that people still struggle to explain how it unfolded. Samuel, a German-born man, was sentenced to penal transportation to England in 1795. But his path quickly turned dark when he did something so extreme that it earned him a direct death sentence. Yet fate refused to let him die. At the time, Britain operated a penal colony in Sydney, and Samuel, along with several other convicts, managed to escape and make their way back toward England. Once free, they targeted the home of a wealthy woman, robbing her while a police officer was stationed as guard. During the robbery, the officer was killed, and given the seriousness of the crime, authorities launched a relentless hunt to capture the group. During the trial, the wealthy woman identified Joseph Samuel as one of the attackers. He admitted to the robbery but strongly denied harming the officer. Still, because she named him and there was no reliable evidence linking anyone else, Samuel alone was sentenced to die by hanging, while the others were released due to lack of proof. On September 26, 1803, Samuel stood beside several other condemned men as they prepared for execution. The ropes used that day were specifically designed to hold more than 450 kilograms, far beyond the weight of any person. As the trap was released and the other prisoners began to struggle, Samuel's rope suddenly snapped, sending him crashing to the ground while the others remained suspended. The crowd gasped in disbelief. How could a rope that strong break so easily? The executioner quickly rushed to correct the situation. Second rope, just as strong as the first, was brought out, placed around Samuel's neck, and he was lifted again. Moments later, the cart beneath him was pulled away, and the new rope loosened instantly, sending him falling to the ground once more. Witnesses were stunned into silence, unsure whether they were witnessing mechanical failure or something much stranger. The executioner stood frozen in confusion. He had fastened the rope with absolute precision, tested it himself, and knew there was no reason it should fail. Yet Samuel had fallen again, spraining his ankle and crying out in pain as he hit the ground. Determined to finish the job, the executioner prepared a third rope, forcing Samuel back onto the cart as the crowd murmured anxiously, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding right before their eyes. This time, the rope was secured with extreme care. Every knot was pulled tight, every loop checked twice. The executioner stepped back, gave the order, and the cart rolled forward once again. But in a moment that felt almost impossible, the rope snapped free for the third time, sending Samuel crashing to the dirt below. The entire crowd erupted, no longer horrified, but furious, shouting that the execution must stop and Samuel be spared. The chaos grew so intense that the chief policeman halted the execution and ordered everyone to wait for the governor's arrival. When the governor inspected the ropes himself, he found no cuts, no tampering, and no damage that could explain why 3 ropes, each capable of holding hundreds of kilograms, had failed only for Samuel. With the other condemned men already dead using identical ropes, the governor addressed the crowd and agreed that this seemed to be a sign of divine intervention. Joseph Samuel's sentence was immediately commuted to life imprisonment, and his miraculous survival became one of the most astounding execution stories ever recorded. Number 1 brings us to one final case, a story so intense that it feels almost unbelievable. Wesla Miguel, born November 1, 1896. Served as a Mexican soldier under the command of General Francisco Pancho Villa, but when the Mexican Revolution erupted, Miguel was captured by opposing forces and sentenced to death by firing squad, one of the most brutal and unforgiving methods of execution known to history. During the execution, Miguel was struck by 8 or 9 bullets across his body, each impact powerful enough to send most men to the ground instantly. But even that wasn't the end. To ensure his death, an officer stepped forward and delivered a coup de grace, a final bullet to the head at point-blank range, a shot meant to eliminate any chance of survival. Yet in a twist that defied all logic, Miguel realized moments later that he was still alive. Terrified that moving would lead to another barrage of gunfire, he made the only choice he could. He stayed completely still, pretending to be dead as the executioners walked away. When night finally fell, Miguel dragged his wounded body across the ground, inch by inch, until he reached the Church of St. James Apostle just 3 blocks away. A church member discovered him, carried him to safety, and cared for him as he slowly recovered from injuries that should have been fatal. Though he lived the rest of his life permanently scarred and severely disfigured, he survived the impossible, a full firing squad, and a direct shot to the head. Miguel's story became a symbol of endurance, resilience, and the unexplainable moments in history where fate seems to turn in a person's favor. These cases remind us of a profound truth. Executions, even when carried out with absolute conviction, do not always end the way the world expects. Whether through human error, mechanical failure, remarkable physiology, or moments that appear almost supernatural, each of these individuals stepped into death and somehow returned. Their stories remain some of the most haunting, perplexing, and unforgettable chapters in the long history of capital punishment.
I am definitely against the death penalty and the possibility of the errors that can be made.